I think regarding heaven and hell, if someone's going to say that God is ethical or God is just, then you can't be ethical or just and not have a system of reward and punishment. I mean, assuming punishment is hell and reward is heaven. I think that in order for God to be just, there has to be some sort of hell, even though the Bible doesn't entertain the idea much. And I think that itself would qualify as a logical argument, not necessarily something that could be proven. But if someone's already convinced of the idea that God is just, then you should also be convinced of the idea that he's going to punish people who hurt others.
Yeah, I agree. And even it also determines what concept of hell people have, because if you look at what early Christians viewed hell as and what Jews, Second Temple Judaism, what they thought hell was, it's very different from what a lot of people say it is now, where it's like you get this imagery of like Dante's Inferno, where it's like there's different realms for different sins, and if you do this, you go to this realm and suffer that, when none of that's really in the Bible. So maybe there's some contradictions based on the conception of hell people have in alignment with certain stuff.
I have to agree with Alvin on this. So like my main core like the confusion that I have or the struggle that I'm having is that like okay we say God is limitless. You know, a lot of things that are happening in the world, they're predestined, predetermined. God already knows it. God also has a system of, let's say we say he's just, he has a system, there's a heaven, there's a hell. But then like why? Like if he already knows what everyone is going to do and what the destiny of everyone is, why does he need a system of heaven and hell? Do we have that much meaning, or what purpose does it serve for us to go to heaven and hell if he's limitless and he's the one, everything, he's the singularity, everything goes back to him? And then like is it that just we do not grasp his limitless? That's the only conclusion that I could come up to, is that we can't grasp his limitless and his power, his authority, and his whatever you want to attributes you want to give to him that are unique, that we just can't comprehend. So like I just can't logically go down a path of like heaven and hell, and just when I also go back to the other properties or characteristics of God and say like why do these even things exist, right? I don't know if that makes sense.
So at least from a Jewish perspective, I think the line started getting skewed when people were being condemned to hell by others because of heresies, not necessarily because of unethical behavior. If you didn't believe God behaved in a certain way or was possibly not limitless, you would in some way not make it to heaven, which is a nice way of saying that you're going to end up in hell. I mean, this is a statement of Maimonides. Maimonides says that if someone believes that God has a shape or a body, then he's not going to make it to the world to come, which essentially means that if there's a hell, that's where he's going to be. While in the Bible, it seems that if there's a hell, because the hell is not also mentioned in the Bible, but it seems that what angers God in the Bible is unethical behavior, not someone challenging a logical argument, because all these ideas of God being not limited by this, or you're not able to describe God by what he is, but only by what he is. And all these things, at least in the Jewish world, it was introduced by Maimonides. The rabbis in the Talmud never made such arguments to prove God. It seems perhaps they had a more primitive understanding of God versus the sophisticated understanding that I think Maimonides picked up from Islam and from Aristotelian thought. And nowadays, it seems like God is less accessible to the average man because the gatekeepers, i.e. the rabbis and the imams and the pastors, have built a wall of belief that someone has to accept in order to be welcomed in. I also struggle with the notion that how can you have full free will and at the same time assume that God knows what you're going to do before you're going to do it and still is in some way shocked that you did the wrong thing and is still going to punish you for doing the wrong thing. There's many rabbis who also had issues with this. Even Maimonides says that God doesn't know what you're going to do before you're going to do it, that he controls everything else but that. There's a statement in the Talmud that he comments on. It says that everything's under heaven but the fear of heaven, which means that he doesn't know the right choice you're going to make. Well, there's another rabbi like this who says that God doesn't know the future. His name was Gershonides. The Ralbag is his acronym. It bothers a lot of people, and it bothers me also, because the notion of him being omniscient and omnipotent, it seems like they're later developed ideas in a doctrinal sense. There are statements in the Torah and in the Jewish Bible that does paint him in that way, but there's statements that paint him in the other way also. Now, does that mean that we have to, in some way, go with what makes him seem more supernatural, or just say because there's two instances of possibly God changing his mind or regretting making man, and there's another instance of him knowing what's going to happen before it's going to happen? Perhaps that's for us to take a step back and say, this just means that we don't know anything really about how God functions, apart from the fact that he's ethical and he's righteous. It says the holy God is made holy through righteousness. But nowadays, people try to speak for God. I mean, first they'll make a statement that no one could know God, no one could see God, or our brains aren't developed enough to even conceive who God is. At the same time, they'll build a wall that if you don't accept, well, God is limitless and God is this and that, then you're a heretic. So I think it's better not to speak in a definitive manner about God at all.
Yeah, but I would want to get Alvin or Hamza's, or at least the divine simplicity view on the exact question you asked, or Rabbi, about if God already knows what I'm going to do and I don't do it, then he gets mad or like that. But also, why is God ethical? Why does he have to be ethical? Isn't that something that we shouldn't even go into? That our ethics is something, but what God is ethical or what he could be is totally beyond our comprehension. He doesn't have to live in the sphere that he's designated to us, right?
He wants us to validate him as worthy of being God. That's why there's many rabbis who say that when it says echad,
one,
it doesn't really mean that he's one, but that he's unique among the other gods, the other false gods, in the fact that he's an ethical God that one's supposed to emulate, and he's the ethical lawgiver. To assume that God could behave unbecoming to the law he's given to us already makes him not God. The reason he's God to us is because he's good, not because he claimed to create the world. At least that's the biblical narrative.
Well, there's something now, Kawaja, as far as God being God knowing and why would he do this if this happens, there's a part in the book of Exodus that is very perplexing, right? And when you really look at it, it is kind of confusing, right? But it kind of goes along with what we're talking about. Like where you ask, well, if God knew this would happen, why did he tell these people to do this? So